This weekend, NASCAR heads back to the last great Coliseum for yet another edition of the Food City 500. Every time the short track is the next stop on the tour, the NASCAR faithful rejoice and prepare for what is 9 times out of 10 a great race on the track. Unfortunately, when you look at Bristol Motor Speedway, particularly the spring race, you can see that the event and its popularity has dwindled over the past couple years. Long gone are the days with sellout crowds and waitlists to get tickets, and instead thousands of empty aluminum seats can be visible from an aerial camera angle. So with this video, we are going to look at the drop in demand of the Bristol Spring Race, how it happened, and how Bristol Motor Speedway and SMI can pull out of this slump. The story of decline starts in 2006, where arguably the peak of the Food City 500 was hit. A sellout crowd of 160,000 fans saw Kurt Busch move Matt Kenseth out of the way to victory, and Jeff Gordon later got into an altercation with Kenseth after getting spun on the final lap. It was a memorable Bristol race, and with the momentum and popularity going forward, this event would be unchanged for a long period of time. With that said, however, 2 key changes occurred in 2007 that would change the racing product at Bristol. The first was the addition of the Car of Tomorrow, which would make its debut during the Food City 500. It was designed mostly for safety, as the rear wing and spoiler was brought in to help the drivers and usher in a new era for NASCAR. With the new car, lead changes decreased slightly from 19 to 14, but it made up with an entertaining finish. In victory lane, ironically, after winning the race, Kurt Busch had some choice words for NASCAR's next generation model.
I'm still not a very big fan of these things. I can't stand to drive them, they suck.
In addition to the new car, Bruton Smith decided it was time to bulldoze the racing surface and repave the world's fastest half mile before the 2007 Sharpie 500. The new layout would feature progressive banking, which was designed to create multiple groove racing similar to SMI tracks in Charlotte, Atlanta, and Las Vegas. At the time, this was a huge risk by the track owners, especially considering the high demand and popularity of Bristol. Today, you see tracks like Texas and Kentucky repaved because attendance is declining, and they want to create more excitement with new pavement. Luckily, the new Bristol received some positive reviews from an early test. As Todd Bodine stated, "It's unbelievable. This is the way a track should be built. I will not be surprised to see 3-wide racing here." When the calendar turned to August, the racing was similar to those claims, as there was some great racing in the back of the pack, and we indeed saw some intense side-by-side racing unlike the previous pavement. Unfortunately, it resembled those cookie-cutter tracks more than it did Bristol, as it was easier to spread out compared to past events. Carl Edwards and Casey Kane combined to lead 487 of the 500 laps, and Edwards claimed the night race with a margin of 1.4 seconds. At the time, this was a large margin for Bristol standards, as a majority of the finishes during the early 2000s were under a second. While the racing wasn't bad, it wasn't the Bristol beating and banging short track style racing fans wanted, which left some fans disappointed after 500 laps. As the 2008 Food City 500 saw a great finish and a sellout crowd, the United States economy was battling a great recession as stock prices were down as real estate prices skyrocketed. Nowhere did this hit harder than the blue-collar workers, as at the end of March 2009, blue-collar unemployment was more than 3 times higher than that for those with managerial and professional skills. Jobs inside the sport of NASCAR also took a hit, as the merger and closure of several NASCAR race teams left families without income, and more importantly, no luxury spending to attend NASCAR events. During that time period, a majority of NASCAR's fans, especially the hardcore ones, fit this category, and as you will see, the Great Recession would impact Bristol attendance numbers pretty hard. While the 2010 race saw an entertaining battle with 29 lead changes en route to Jimmy Johnson's 50th Cup Series victory, yet another historic feat was broken. However, it was for all the wrong reasons. Despite a stellar crowd of 138,000 jam-packing the facility on a cold March afternoon, the event failed to sell out tickets. This became the first time since the stadium renovations of the late 1990s that a Bristol race failed in this aspect, which was certainly alarming for SMI as well as NASCAR themselves. In 2011, for the 50th anniversary of the racetrack's inception, things did not improve for the Tennessee racetrack as its day spectacle continued its free fall. Only 120,000 spectators watched Kyle Busch claim his third Bristol Spring Race in an otherwise uncharacteristic Bristol event. Attendance kept free-falling when 2012 came around as the St. Patrick's Day race was lucky to find 102,000 spectators enter through the turnstiles. While the race saw a great battle between Matt Kenseth and Brad Keselowski, the racing still wasn't Bristol to the eyes of many race fans. A majority still longed for that classic short track feel Bristol had back in the day, and changes needed to be made after losing 58,000 fans in 3 years. As a result, Bruton Smith listened to the fans, and on April 25th, he announced the Speedway was going to eliminate the progressive banking. The decision was made to hopefully turn Bristol back into a one-groove track, much like it was from the 1990s up until the repave, and create more boys-have-at-it moments that brought the Bristol fans to the grandstands. Unfortunately, while Bristol was once again a one-groove track, the outside line became the preferred racing groove. One element that returned to Bristol, however, was heated tempers, as who could forget Tony Stewart's helmet toss after battling with Matt Kenseth, and certainly the fans enjoyed that moment as the near-sellout crowd erupted into cheers and shook the Tennessee Valley when it occurred. This incident also helped the marketing for the spring race, so overall this event was a positive going forward. In 2013, NASCAR made a change to its attendance policy as the final number would no longer be announced to the public. In terms of the Food City 500, it was probably a saving grace that the media couldn't pick apart the final count. The annual running was plagued by a threat of rain despite a decent temperature of 66 degrees Fahrenheit. From a TV angle, the speedway looked half empty and the backstretch looked close to a ghost town. On the racetrack, however, the 2013 running wasn't bad, as the race saw 17 lead changes as well as a battle between Joey Logano and Denny Hamlin. We saw some classic beating and banging, which ignited a rivalry that would carry on into Auto Club. While it was far from the heyday Bristol, this wasn't an awful race, and it had some characteristics of the glory days. The next race was a high point for the Bristol Motor Speedway, as the 2014 edition saw 20 lead changes occur during the extended 503-lap event. You also had some of the classic short track moments and great racing, with Carl Edwards claiming the Coliseum over teammate Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Unfortunately, with the Bristol Spring Race, there is always a catch, as the event scheduled to start at 1:13 was delayed by almost 2 hours, and once they finally got racing, Mother Nature showed time and time again it was not a fan of Spring Bristol. After another 3-hour rain delay, the race was finally finished at around 10 p.m. local time, with only a few thousand diehards still in the grandstands. Thankfully, Speedway Motorsports was tired of the abysmal March conditions and asked for a date relocation for the 2015 season. NASCAR accepted and relocated the Food City 500 to mid-April, the 8th race on the calendar. No longer would the spring race have weather problems, and hopefully the fans would return to the hills of Tennessee. That was the case until once again the 2015 edition was plagued by rain. The race featured 3 red flags as well as fog towards the end of the event, as the crowd greatly dispersed by the time Matt Kenseth took the checkered flag at 11 p.m. local time. Most of the fans were washed away after the first red flag, as once again it was only the diehards that remained bracing the cold and stormy conditions. For the first time in 3 years, the Food City 500 started and ended at the scheduled distance and had sunny race conditions throughout the event. Unfortunately, the attendance did not arise as well, as estimations from the Boston Herald put the crowd between 65,000 and 70,000. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still better than a majority of the NASCAR schedule, but the numbers have plummeted by over 57% since the turn of the decade. Certainly not the trend many want to see. In addition, the racing was fairly lackluster as the cars remained glued to the high side. It was near impossible for Dale Jr. and Kurt Busch to make a move on Carl Edwards, as clean air as well as the inferior inside line hurt the racing during the final 104 laps. It was one of the more forgettable Bristol Day races, and fans once again drew concerns about the product on the track. This eventually led to Bristol's third racing surface change in 9 years, as this time some PJ1 track bite was applied to the track's bottom groove. Generally used in drag racing, the substance was brought to increase traction into the car's tires and ultimately make the inside line faster and easier to drive, thus hopefully bringing back some of the older Bristol conditions. For the most part, the first race under the PJ1 did its job, as we saw the inside and outside lines become a factor during the event. Certainly some of the greatest Bristol racing so far halfway through the 2010s, and it's such a shame that the race got moved to a Sunday afternoon, as it washed away a decent crowd on hand for the night race. Hopefully the spring race can be a different story. Unfortunately, Mother Nature was still not a fan of spring racing in Thunder Valley, as both the 2017 and 2018 races were postponed to a Monday afternoon. Despite the entertaining Kyle and Kyle show that saw the bump and run, something the old school fans love to see, the Coliseum had at best 30,000 spectators, and most fans like myself were at school or had work to report to. If you're keeping track at home, the Food City 500 has been run on schedule once in just the last 5 years. Flash forward to 2019 as the haulers have arrived and the race teams are preparing for 500 laps of battle. The weather forecast doesn't look too bad, and the racing product should be great with the reapplication of the PJ1. Certainly the fans will be showing up in drones with this perfect revelation, right? Despite the good vibes, the expected attendance still looks lackluster so far and doesn't seem to be improving from the low bars of yesteryear. Many ticket buying sources such as SeatGeek and Ticketmaster show that the race indeed has a lack of demand, so much that the Bristol Motor Speedway has decided to close off the Waltrip and Kewicki grandstands to make the front and back stretch look full. Honestly, this is not a good decision in my opinion, as I've attended Bristol night races from 2007 to 2014, and the view from turns 3 and 4 is second to none. The one advantage that Bristol has compared to other tracks is its size, and you can sit in the turns and still witness everything on the track. The turns are also the trouble spots and the areas that create the most chaos, which makes it an overall more enjoyable experience. Thank goodness they aren't doing this for the night race, but it's still a loss for the race fans, especially season ticket holders in those sections over the past 2 decades. Even with only 2 sections designated for seating, the attendance does not look promising when they drop the green flag. The blue dots indicate unsold seats, and you can see even the front stretch has a large amount of inventory to sell off. Back in the day, Bristol used to have a waitlist for tickets, and oftentimes the cheapest tickets on the backstretch would cost you an arm and a leg to get in. Nowadays, you can walk up to the front office an hour before the race and buy the best seats in the house for $160. This is sadly how much the prestige of the Food City 500 has fallen, and it's such a shame for one of the few stadium-like tracks in NASCAR. So there you have it, the drop in demand of the Bristol Spring Race. Since the 2006 Food City 500, the event has been hit hard with changes and circumstances that swung its popularity in the wrong direction. In terms of fixing the event, there aren't many solutions that can help bolster the attendance going forward. Personally, the racing product today is far from the issue. Applying the PJ1 has added the lower groove, which allows some beating and banging, while the top still provides some exciting racing and another racing groove for racers to venture into. From my perspective as a true NASCAR fan over the last 10 years, this is certainly the best configuration of Bristol I've seen, and I hope they can continue with the layout. The race date is also not an issue, as no matter how late in the spring you move it, rain still has a great chance of hitting the Tennessee mountains. In my opinion, the spring race needs a sideshow or a big concert to shift gears for the event. Last weekend, the stadium super trucks were in Texas, and for the most part, they put together an entertaining show. When you mix the element of Bristol, I think it could thrive even better, and it could quite possibly attract some of the casual dirt racers or the entertainment-hungry millennials needed to fill the grandstands. Besides that, my only other solution is to make it a night race, but unfortunately that will just eat out of the already declining August attendance. Despite Bristol being one of my favorite tracks, unfortunately it might be time to pull the plug on the spring race. It no longer draws the big crowds. SMI has reported losses of millions in ticket sales and concessions, and Bristol in spring is murky both in the grandstands and in the campgrounds. This could be a positive move for Bristol, as they could move some of those fans at the Food City 500 to the night race and quite possibly start an upswing in attendance for that one event on the tour. Just think about it, quite possibly it could see the prestige the Southern 500 gets with just one day, one race on the tour where we go to Bristol. If Speedway Motorsports follows suit, the simple solution, the obvious choice would be to give Bristol Spring Race to another short track, the Nashville Fairgrounds, as early as 2021. This would be the best way to preserve a short track on the schedule, and Food City can even sponsor the event since it is a Tennessee store chain. Plus, the true diehards of the event shouldn't mind the move because Nashville is only a 3-hour drive from Bristol. With that said, however, this would not be the preferred way to go in my opinion, and I hope Bruton Smith and SMI can breathe new life into this race. But it is going to take years to even get remotely close to its heyday from the 1990s until 2006. So anyways, this is NRF signing out, and just remember, life's a beach and then you drive.